Hope you had some nice vacations. Let's end up World War II with the conferences that settled peace. So this is the last topic for the Second Registry, and I hope you like it. Sharing my screen now. Okay. So we already saw how the beginning of the 20th century started with a big war, a big economical depression. We went through the rise of the totalitarian states, mostly we focused on Hitler and Nazism. We saw the backdrop of how Hitler moved through with stealth in the Euro powers. And finally, the big topic was World War II. So we got a lot on our plate. They decided to make some conferences to settle peace. The first one was named the Conference of Yalta. Yalta is somewhere in Crimea. Crimea is the place where Russia gets into the sea. We already talked about the Crimean War before in this semester. So Yalta, in the Conference of Yalta, 3 leaders joined to shake hands over the destiny of the whole world. These here are the 3 leaders. This is Winston Churchill, this is Franklin Roosevelt, and this is Joseph Stalin. And they decided to start making accords in order to finish the war as fast as possible. They did that in 1943, so before the war ended, but a little bit after the Americans arrived to Normandy. So we regard this as the beginning of the Cold War because they started making divisions, whether they be capitalist or socialist, under the control of the Allies to the west or under the control of the USSR to the east. And even though this conference was met with certain, with certain resistance, they decided to do some things that would impact the later conference, which was much more serious and much more efficient. So first of all, they started talking about Poland because Poland always gets the short end of the stick. Poland was to be distributed to the USSR because the USSR said Poland has always been mine. This was an attempt to take away territory, so give me back Poland. They were like, yeah, sure, have Poland back. They don't really care about Poland. It is now under Germany control. But yeah, okay, take Poland back. No one cares. They started talking about Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was having problems because there were a lot of communist revolutions happening inside of it that were trying to stop the monarchy from happening again because Yugoslavia had a different kind of monarchy. So what they said, just as an idea, is why don't we let some communists enter the monarchy organization and we have a communist monarchy. It sounds amazing. They, of course, never consulted with Yugoslavian people, but they thought it was a good idea to stop Yugoslavia from having this revolution, this revolt, to stop what Nazism did in Germany. And let's just try to make an accord between the 2 political forces. Japan was supposed to be intervened by the USSR when the USA attacked them. And in exchange for the help from the USSR in Japan, they promised the USSR some islands and privileges over those islands and over Japan too. They made a plan, which is called the Morgenthau Plan, which is this one, in which they decided to divide Germany in 4 zones. 1 zone for the British, 1 zone for the Americans, 1 zone for the French, and 1 zone for the Russians, the USSR. But they finally agreed to do not do that. Let's make it just a little bit more broad, more general, and we will have the South Germany and the North Germany. That was the original plan. Some of these areas were to belong to the French, the Saar part that's here in gray. Some parts were to belong to Poland, the East Prussia part, and the south of East Prussia and Upper Silesia, we call it. And northern part of East Prussia would belong to the USSR, and the international zone would be controlled mostly by the UK. This was the original idea. The red one was supposed to be controlled by the USSR, and the blue one was supposed to be controlled by the Americans. This was the original plan, the Morgenthau Plan. And this is the first conference that was held in order to try and decide the course of the world after World War II, even though World War II had not been finished by then. They held another conference a couple of years later, which is called the Potsdam Conference. In the Potsdam Conference, there were some changes in the lineup, but the protagonists were the same. It was the USSR, the Americans, and the British. And the British started with Winston Churchill, depicted here. This is Winston Churchill. But Roosevelt was succeeded by Truman, which is this guy, and Stalin was still there. Mario Bros was still there. They, oh, here have the succession. So Truman succeeded Roosevelt, and Attlee, who is going to be the prime minister, democratically elected in the UK, will succeed Churchill. These three persons would decide the curse of the world over the next few years because they decided to take everything they went through and use it as a justification to decide over the rest of the countries. The main goal was to set peace accords and war settlements. So let's talk about how we will stop wars from happening through these few next years that come. And let's say, how do we make the settlements from Italy, from Germany, and from Japan to pay for the damages they have caused? And it was something like the end of World War I, too. So they decided, let's have Germany divided into 4 sections, one for each allied power, something like the Morgenthau Plan, but let's make it more concise. So let's make 4 different zones that will be controlled by different countries, and let's return all of the territories they conquered to their respective countries of origin. So Austria will be divided from Germany. Austria is its own country. Let's stop Belgium from being under Nazi occupation. So now you can return to being Belgium, the Netherlands too, Denmark too. All of the territories that they conquered were just unconditionally surrendered to the original owners. They proposed a plan of 3 concepts: demilitarization, denazification, and democratization. What it means is no more military orders in Europe, so no more totalitarian regimes, even though Spain still had Francisco Franco there, so there was some of a conflict with Spain, we'll get there, but the idea was to stop militarization from occurring in Europe. Denazification, so no more Nazis, let's persecute all of the Nazis that we see, and let's eliminate Nazism from history. And democratization, we need more democratic places in Europe to be ruled by democracy. Of course, the USSR is not democratic, but they like the idea because they see it's easier for them to agree with the accords that the Americans and the British are leading. So they decide to have these 3 concepts as guidelines for the Potsdam Conference. And because of these guidelines, they decide that Nazi war criminals are to be persecuted all over the world. Most Nazi war criminals will flee to Southern America. So some of them will go to Brazil, some of them will go to Argentina, and all across Southern America. They will flee there, and people will start persecuting them. One of the most famous Nazi war criminals that fled to Brazil was Dr. Mengele, Dr. Death. And we already talked about him a little bit in class, but just remember he was a scientist or a doctor that made experiments with people, and he was brutal. He killed thousands upon thousands of people just to further his own research. And he fled to Brazil. They found him years later, and yeah. They decided also that there will be a line that runs all along Poland called the Oder-Neisse line, which would send apart the boundaries between Germany and Poland, and to the long run would set apart the world from the capitalist world, the Western world, from the socialist world, the Eastern one. So they decided to make that line the Oder-Neisse line. They decided to resettle racial minorities from Germany, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia into their respective countries of origin. So some of them were Jewish, some of them were Roma, some of them were Slavs, and they decided that they had suffered enough in the concentration camps that they discovered while they were invading Germany and Poland. So they decided to resettle them as peacefully and as comfortable as possible. Of course, it was impossible because of the human suffering, but they tried to do it. The start of Israel as a country for the Jewish is going to be born here. It's not made up yet, but it's going to start here. And they decide on Japanese rendition terms, in which they say, okay, Japan, you made a whole mess. You did not want to surrender. You caused the atomic bombs. Of course, that's debatable, but that's what the conference said. And in exchange for the surrender and the peace around us, you have to stop investing as much in military. To this day, that's the reason why they are so technologically and socially advanced, because they do not spend any single penny on an army. So they have a lot of progress in other areas because they stopped investing money on that. And when they make the United Nations, when they make the final decisions to form the United Nations, they agree to stop Francisco Franco from Spain from joining, because it goes against the ideas of demilitarization and democratization. So they do not like Spain right now. They are like the odd brother that's hanging around, but they accept that they had no part in the war, so they really have no excuse to stop them, but they agree to not let them because Spain is going to be an issue, or so they think. This is the way the map is going to look after the Potsdam Conference. If you look at Berlin, Berlin is divided into 4 different areas. The wall of Berlin is going to be reminiscent of this throughout the rest of the 20th century. The red parts, of course, they're from the Soviets, the color of the USSR. Notice how Germany also has a little part in Vienna that's similarly divided in